August 15th, 2005, item number 75. Today's special guest is Phil Gordon from the Phil Gordon's World Series of Poker podcast.
Podcast411.com. Listen different.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Rob, and this is the Podcast 411 podcast. Before we get into the interview with Phil Gordon, a couple quick news and notes. First, yes, we were having issues with our server. The hosting company that I use, the server our site was on, went down Friday morning. They finally did get it back up Friday afternoon, but then I did not have access to it until late last night to actually make any changes to it, and a couple other times during the weekend the site went down. They tell me that things are fixed now. That said, I still cannot get into the databases to make changes to some of the entries in the search directory. So for those of you that have sent emails on some updates to your listing, I will get to it as soon as I have access. I would also like to apologize to the person at the gas station that I took my frustrations out on. He was gassing up his minivan next to my car, and he had the vehicle running with his family inside the car as he's gassing it up, and I turned to him and said, you really should turn your car off when you're gassing up, and he gave me this look, and I said, look, if you don't care about your family safety, can you at least turn it off, because I don't feel like getting blown up with you. And then I made another comment, which was probably not appropriate, but anyway, I would just like to apologize for him for taking my frustration out on him. Again, though, I would have to say he is an idiot, so when you gas your car up, folks, please turn it off. Gasoline's really flammable. My other technical issue this past week was with my iPod. My iPod had gone down again. I went to the Apple Store, they replaced it with a brand new one, brought it home, went to hook it up, and it didn't work either. What I found out with the iPod, if you're on 10.4.2 and you are not plugging your FireWire cable directly between the iPod and the computer, you're probably going to get an error 36. So if you're using a USB 2 cable or a FireWire port, or if you're going out of the cinema display FireWire port, you'll probably get an error 36 if you've updated to 10.4.2. All you have to do to get around that is plug your iPod directly into the FireWire port on your computer. I'd also like to thank everybody that showed up at the Kansas City meetup. We had a great show up this time. Even though the weather was absolutely horrendous, we now have 28 members in the Kansas City Podcasters meetup, and we're hoping to get that group up to over 40 by the time September's meetup rolls around. Today's interview is with Phil Gordon with the World Series of Poker podcast. As I've mentioned before, I've been listening to this podcast now for about a month. It really, really helped me in my poker game, and Phil gets it. It's a great podcast. And what the podcast is about is Phil goes around, he gives you updates from World Series of Poker events, gives you a little advice, little tips, and then he interviews some of the other famous poker players, including celebrities such as James Woods. We're going to go ahead right now and get into the interview with Phil Gordon from the World Series of Poker. Here we go. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
First question I start everyone off with is, what was your first computer?
My first computer was an Apple IIe. I got it in 7th grade, 6th grade. My mom was making amends for divorcing my dad, so she bought me a computer.
I just lost a bet. I had a bet with a friend, Derek, and we were betting, and he had picked the Apple II, and I had picked the Commodore 64. We were guessing which one you were.
No, I was an Apple boy.
Okay. Now, you had gone around in one of your podcasts, and you had asked people what they were listening to on their iPod.
Yeah.
Did anybody say a podcast?
No, in fact, they did not. I had a lot of people at the World Series talk to me and thank me for doing my World Series of Poker podcast, so I know they were listening, but no one actually. I think that would be a little bit confusing if you're sitting at the table trying to concentrate on poker and someone was talking in your ear about gardening.
I've done it a couple times. Yeah, I have to actually take the earbud out when I have to concentrate. So yeah, it does make it hard, unless the podcast itself is one of the music ones, like Dave's Lounge is a good one, which plays like electronica music, it's real soothing. Now, speaking of your iPod, is Pink Floyd still out of your iPod?
Yep, completely removed.
Back to Moby?
Yeah, I'm diversifying a little bit now. Yeah, I've got a lot of Lenny Kravitz on there now, still all the Moby. Moby's just that Play album is just a perfect album for playing poker too, I think. Until you get short stacked.
When you're short stacked now, what are you listening for?
I want to pick the beat up a little bit. I'm going to have to play a little bit faster. maybe a little Red Hot Chili Peppers. Can't be afraid to go broke when you're short stacked. You got very little to lose, and it does require you to be much more aggressive. So I want to get in that frame of mind, and changing music is just what it takes.
What made you want to get in and do a podcast? Who brought the idea up to you, or was it something that you had heard about?
My business partner and best friend, Ray First, is into everything technical. He's the guy that you call when you're thinking about buying a new computer, when you're thinking about getting into this Vonage, or, he just knows everything. He knows the best of the best, and he's very dialed in on everything tech. And he's my business partner in my new company, Expert Insight, which produces educational and instructional DVDs. And Ray said, hey, we need to drive some traffic to the website to get people to know about your new DVD. You need to do a podcast. I'm like, a pod what? And he said, yeah, you're going to be doing a podcast. And I'm like, all right. Well, I wasn't all that excited about it, in all honesty, because it seemed like a lot of work. But he convinced me that it was in our best interest to do so. And I had a digital voice recorder already, so I said, okay, well, I guess I'll start going around and talking to some of my friends in the poker world. I did that for a few days, handed it off to our tech guy, and next thing I know, we were getting tons of hits and great reception from it. So, a lot of people sent back their feedback from the early podcasts, and I took that, integrated it into the future episodes of the show, and over the course of the month kind of felt it out, and I think came up with a pretty good format for it.
Were you having fun doing it? I mean, it sounded like you were.
A couple of days, I will admit, I did not want to get up and go down to the World Series of Poker. I didn't play in every event, and the events that I didn't want to play, when you're down there like 12, 14 hours a day, the last thing you want to do is get in your car and drive down and talk to more poker players. But Rafe made me promise before the World Series of Poker that I would actually do it every single day that I was in town, and I held up my end of the bargain.
And you even did a couple when you weren't in town.
Yeah, well, I took it to Celebrity Poker. We do a voiceover session for each show where we clean up some of the audio and chat about some of the hands, and interview Dave Foley and one of the executive producers on the show. And yeah, I'll be taking it. I'm actually going to do another one this weekend. Stuff Magazine is having a celebrity poker get together with about 40 high profile celebrities in Las Vegas this weekend at the Palms Casino, and I'll be down there with my voice recorder. I'm actually emceeing the tournament. I'm going to try to get some interviews with some of the stars that will be playing in that show. So the good news is that you're going to continue doing the podcast then? They certainly won't be a regular feature, but anytime I think something I'm doing is podcast worthy, I'm definitely going to do it. Let me give you my testament to your podcast. I play in these poker leagues, and I'm definitely a hack, or easy money, as you would call it. And I never made it past an hour in these 3-hour tournaments they have here at the local bars. And tournaments about 100 to 120 people. After listening to all your podcasts in like a 1-week period, I made it to third in the tournament. That's fantastic. And these are 3-hour tournaments. Before, I'd never even made it an hour. And now I'm regularly an hour and a half, 2 hours as a minimum, and come close to the final table or in it now on a regular basis since listening to your podcast. So thank you very much. Well, if you want to win, get the DVD. I got your book. I got the book, and the DVD will be next. So. All right. That's exactly what you need to get you from third to first. Yeah. So I figured I was going to. I tend to have a lot more third place finishes than first. Hey, and I tell you what, it was a bad beat on third. Pair of queens to a pair. God, here we go. Pair of sixes. I know. But yeah. Pair of sixes. Yeah, okay. Now I did learn. There's a lot of bad beat stories, my friend. So this Thursday, new season on Bravo, Celebrity Poker. Yeah, we have 12 new shows. It should be 12 weeks in a row. Pretty good, exciting shows, I think. Who are some of the celebrities coming up this week? I think this week is our reality all-star week. Johnny Fairplay from Survivor, the guy that lied about his grandma. I don't know if you're a reality fan. Yeah, Charla from The Amazing Race. Okay. Trishelle, the Tramp from Real World. Andrew Firestone, The Bachelor. And Omarosa, who probably needs no introduction. Later this season, we got Hallie Mandel, who was fantastic. Stephen Collins, Meatloaf. I love the meat. Let's see, we got a ladies' night. Kathy Najimy, Ricky Lake, Sharon Lawrence, Catherine Morris from Cold Case, and Carolyn Ray. Anthony Anderson, very funny guy. Amber Tamblyn from Joan of Arcadia. Alex Trebek, do. Michael Vartan from Alias is back. Penny Marshall, Rosie O'Donnell, Eddie Cibrian from Tilt, and Travis Tritt, Mo Gaffney. Yeah, it's a good season. I'm looking forward to it. One of the things you always say is short stack, and you're talking a lot of times about 15 times the blind being short stacked. Where do you consider yourself being short stacked, and why? Well, I think that you got to start thinking about making a move when you get down to that 12 to 15 big blind range. If you fall much lower than that, every hand is potential elimination. So, whenever I get down to about 12 to 15 big blinds, I'm thinking about making moves. I'm thinking about putting a lot of pressure, using the power of the 12 to 15 big blinds to put some real pressure on someone. What I realize is that if someone raises 3 times a big blind and I can move 15 at them, they got to have a real hand to call. Because normally in a tournament, the average stack will be about 30 to 35 big blinds. So if I can move 15 at them, I'm threatening to take half their stack right there. And they got to have a real hand to call. So what I try to look for is a loose, aggressive player who's playing too many pots, who comes in for a raise, and then I just move in on them and try to pick up that pot. If I win that pot, I usually win a size of about 5 or 6 big blinds there without any conflict.
One thing I definitely want to talk about, because there's a lot of geeks that listen to my show, because I interview podcasters, and so geeks listening to geeks talk to geeks.
Well, you've contacted another one.
You are, exactly. You're a geek, and most people don't realize that. And explain to people your background.
Let's see. Geek story number 1, I quit high school to go to college early at 15, graduated from Georgia Tech at 20, degree in computer science. Started a computer software company with a couple of friends in 1992 and sold it to Cisco in 1997, and pretty much retired from computer software and computer engineering at that time, and did a lot of third world travel after that, and now I got into poker pretty much full time at that point. So yeah, there was hardly a bigger geek than you'd ever meet. I get a lot of email from people that I used to go to high school with, actually, and the email always goes like, "It looks like you, it sounds like you, you're tall, he was tall, but there's no way that can be you." When I was 14, I grew 9 inches in 1 year.
Oh.
And I went from about 5 foot. I was already tall. I went from 5'8" to 6'7", but I retained my 135 pounds, 140 pounds. So I was rail thin, could hardly walk. Most of the joints and bones of my body were extremely in a lot of pain, and very unathletic, uncoordinated. Never had a date in high school. Didn't go to any proms, and pretty much that continued for most of my college career. And it was really only about 93, 94 that I started filling out a little bit and gaining some confidence, and it was a very painful experience to be a kid.
Now, okay, you said not having dates, and having Cisco buy your company obviously is going to improve your dating situation.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm not interested in that in particular. I mean, I'm certainly not going to date anyone who likes me for money. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just crazy.
No.
There are a lot of fantastic women in the world that are fully capable of supporting themselves and don't need anyone to help them with that. I like strong, independent-minded women that have a lot going on for themselves. I'm not looking to take care of anyone. Have
you dated any female poker players?
Any female poker players? No, I have not. There is a real scarcity in the poker world of dateable women. Yeah.
Well, the ratios probably weren't that much different than over in the science department at Georgia Tech.
Yeah, when I went to Georgia Tech, the ratio was like 6-to-1 guys to girls. I think it's more like 2-to-1 now. I haven't been back in years, But for the most part, it wouldn't have mattered if it was 100-to-1 women to men when I was a kid, in my early 20s. Still wouldn't have been able to get a date.
It just seems that Cisco has made a lot of people's dreams come true. Yeah,
well, they were on a huge buying spree there for a little while, and they were buying every company in sight. Those were the good times, The late 90s and even 2000 was okay for a little while. Very heady times, and I think a lot of people got lucky. I was one of the ones that got a little bit lucky. I certainly didn't get as lucky as people think. If I had a tenth of the money that people think I have, I'd be on a boat in the Caribbean with a 100-foot yacht in the Caribbean fully crewed, and I wouldn't be wasting my time, running around the country and such. But I would say, the high-tech thing was fantastic, and I'm looking for another one coming up here soon. I think we're just at the point of a resurgence in the high-tech field, and a lot of new technologies are going to spur the next round of big development and hopefully big capital and investment in the high-tech field.
Yeah, we're starting to see it. Even in podcasting, we're seeing money come into podcasting in the last couple of weeks now. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, there are a couple of IPOs that have been pretty interesting here, and, the real growth companies continue to do well. Certainly people realize that despite the proliferation of PCs and high-speed internet connections, that we're just now, we're not even 50% penetrated into the marketplace.
One thing I want to make sure that gets mentioned is you have a 20 tips book that's available for as a tax donation. How can people find that, and where do they go to locate that?
Well, I'm a board member and a huge supporter for the Cancer Research and Prevention Foundation. This is an extremely fiscally responsible charity that really harps on prevention as the number one way to prevention of cancer is easy to do. 75% of cases approximately could be prevented with simple lifestyle changes or early screening. I don't think people really realize that. Obviously, smoking is the number one factor involved. It's amazing to me when I read recently that 25.2% of American men are still smokers. How is that possible? You know, it's so damaging and irresponsible. That being said, anyway, so CRPF is doing a lot of great work. We're really making some fantastic progress in the search for a cure and in getting the message out for preventive measures. That being said, the little 20 tips book that the celebrities on Celebrity Poker Showdown are using, or sometimes referring to, I donated to CRPF really like the first week after we filmed the show, and it's available exclusively online for a $20 tax-deductible donation. You send in the donation, it's automatic. They email you the book back. You can have it printed at Kinko's. If you're an advanced player, there's not much in there for you except a good feeling that you made a donation to a good cause. But if you're a new player or even an intermediate player, I think there's some good stuff in there that will definitely be worth the $20. You can get it online at www.preventcancer.org.
Well, thank you.
It's also available there, by the way, autographed copies of my DVD and also a phone lesson with me for a loved one or for yourself for a substantial donation, of course. But if you want a 30-minute or an hour phone lesson, or to surprise someone in your family that's a huge poker player, go online and make a big donation, and I'll give them a call.
All right, thank you. I'll definitely put a link in the show notes so everyone will be able to find that.
Okay.
Phil, anything you'd like to mention before we get out of here?
I really do appreciate everyone listening to my podcast. I got a lot of very positive feedback, and I did my best to incorporate some of the suggestions that people sent in. Definitely keep your RSS subscription going. There'll be some more stuff coming soon. Yeah, if you haven't checked out the video, I think you'd enjoy it. It's at expertinsight.com, and keep up the good work.
And Phil, I would like to thank you for not making your podcast an infomercial. It really is a great podcast.
We begin and we end with a little tagline for Expert Insight, but for the most part, I wanted people to understand what it was like to be at the World Series of Poker, to experience the excitement and thrills of trying to work your way through a big field. I got lucky. I made a couple of final tables there. I had a couple of chances to win a bracelet. I think you could hear in my voice that it was one of the most disappointing things that's ever happened to me. To get knocked out of both those final tables. So
when you're listening too, you get drawn in. You're like, okay, we're doing good. Here we are, and then all of a sudden you come back and go, well, that's it, busted out, and then you're like, so
yeah.
it does drag you in and get you rooting for you. So
appreciate it, and thank you again to all the podcast community for your continued support.
Okay, well, thank you, Phil, for being on the show.
Okay, cheers.
Well, folks, that concludes our interview with Phil Gordon from the World Series of Poker podcast. Phil, thank you so much again for coming on the show. I highly recommend you check out Phil's podcast at expertinsight.com. Again, expertinsight.com. And you don't have to be a poker player or lover to check out this podcast. It's a very well done, very good podcast. If you're a podcaster and you want to see how someone in traditional media does it and does it well and actually gets it, this is a good one to check out. Again, expertinsight.com. Phil, thanks once again for coming on the show. At the end of today's podcast, we'll be playing a promo from the K9 cast. For those of you that were curious, the interview with Phil Gordon was done via Skype out to his cell phone. On our next podcast, our guest will be Greg from the 5 Questions podcast. Well, that's going to go ahead and do it for us today. As always, this is your host, Rob, from Podcast 411, reminding you to listen different.
Are you a dog? Are you worried that your owners won't know what to do for you in a disaster or emergency? If you get lost, do you want people to know how to help you find your way home? When your owners train you, do you want it to be fun? If the answer to any of these questions is yes, then get your owners to listen to the K9 cast. You can do it. We all know who's really in charge.
It's the K9 cast with Tara and Walter, and you can listen to us online at k9cast.com.